What's up everybody, this is Mike with Streamline Canine, and in this video we're going to go over feeding schedules. If I do my job right, you'll have a much better understanding of feeding schedules and the important role that they play in training. To put it as simply as I can, a feeding schedule is just your dog's expectation around food. When are they going to eat? How much are they going to eat? Where do they eat? That sort of thing. On the surface, it may not seem like a big deal, especially as it pertains to training, but it is a huge deal. A good feeding schedule is the foundation of high food motivation in a dog. And motivation is absolutely everything. The more motivation you have, the easier training is all around. And if you don't have enough motivation, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you and your dog. Because if your dog is not interested in what you're offering them in the beginning stages of training, if they're not motivated enough for what you have, your only option is going to be punishment. And punishment is something that has its place, but not in the beginning or even intermediate stages of training. So if you want to set everyone up for success, you need to have a solid feeding schedule. Before we get into what I want you to do, let's talk about what not to do. And there's really only one big thing I really advise against, and that is free feeding. Free feeding is just leaving a food bowl out for your dog to access at all times, where they can eat as much as they want, whenever they want. Unless there is some sort of medical reason why your dog needs to be on a free feeding schedule, I highly advise against using free feeding. Not only does the dog generally eat too much, but the dog also never develops an urgency to eat because food is always available. So if you combine both being full all the time with no urgency around eating, the dog's motivation for food is going to plummet. That's going to make training much more difficult. Food motivation is really important in the beginning stages of training, whether you have a dog that is motivated for toys or not. Because either way, it's much more efficient to teach behaviors with food before you graduate to toys, if your dog likes toys. Or if you have a dog that could care less about toys, then you'll always be on food. So either way, you're going to need a high amount of food motivation to teach the behaviors you want. If your dog is overweight, there's a good chance that their food drive will also be really low. But not always. There's some dogs out there that could be as big as a blimp and they'll just keep eating and eating. If that's your dog, you may not need to worry about that, but still having your dog at a healthy weight, it should be a goal that you strive for. A healthy looking dog will have a taper from the rib cage up into their hips. And then also if you look at them from an above view, their belly won't be ballooned out or bloated out. It'll look kind of tucked in a little bit. And it's okay to see some ribs. You don't want to see a ton of ribs, like maybe the last two or something like that. But that's generally where you want them to be. And that's also kind of breed dependent, so use some common sense. A dog that's too lean, you'll see their spine and their hip bones and maybe all of their ribs. A dog that's overweight will have their belly parallel to the floor or even beyond parallel. And if you looked at them from above, they would look kind of ballooned out. There's some dogs out there that seem like they don't have much of a food drive, but let me tell you, they do. If your dog does not have much of a food drive, there's a pretty good chance that they feel like that they're getting more than enough food. So you may have to adjust the amount of food that you feed your dog to bring their food drive up higher. Just like some people can look at a cheeseburger and gain 20 pounds, and other people can eat 20 cheeseburgers and gain a pound, dogs are very much the same way. Some dogs you'll feel like you're hardly feeding them at all, and yet they maintain their weight really, really well. And other dogs you feel like you go through a bag of dog food in no time and it's hard to keep weight on them. So find that sweet spot for your dog where they look lean but athletic, not emaciated, and certainly not fat. Hitting that sweet spot will maximize food drive in your dog. So generally there are two types of feeding schedules that I recommend for basically everybody. And that is what I call caviar training, because it's the way I heard it years ago and I don't really know what else to call it, and feeding through training. Caviar training is probably what you are most familiar with, and that is giving the dog treats on top of the kibble that you feed them throughout the day. And there's nothing inherently wrong with this approach. It's not my preferred one, but you certainly can do this, especially if the treats you're giving them are of really high value It has its place and it can be extremely effective. The key with caviar training is to have treats that are of extremely high value to the dog. And also set it up to where the dog only gets those high value treats when they train and work with you. They don't get them in any other environment or in any other way and for any other reason. If you can associate the high value food reward with training and engaging with you, then caviar training can go a long way. The other method, and my more preferred method personally, is feeding through training. Feeding through training is exactly how it sounds, where the dog doesn't necessarily get treats on top of their food, but they just eat through training. They catch on pretty quick that their opportunity to eat is working with you. And that takes food motivation to a whole nother psychological level for them. And that's the main reason why I like feeding through training. It essentially teaches the dog that they have to go through you to survive. And once they have that level of understanding, it's really, really easy to get them motivated to want to pay attention to you and to access that food. So for example, my Border Collie Nova, she gets 2 cups of food a day. I'll take 2 cups of food, put it in a container of some sort. Whenever it's time to train, I'll take food out of that Tupperware container, put it in a treat pouch, and I'll use it to train. We'll go through that container throughout the day, and that's how she'll eat. She's still getting her same caloric intake that she would if I was just putting the food in a bowl and giving it to her, but instead she's getting the food through training. Still the same amount of calories, just delivered in a different way. Now, if you don't have the time or the schedule to really do this effectively, you can modify it a little bit. So let's say you have to work in the morning and you don't have a lot of time to work with your dog in the morning. You can simply skip breakfast or maybe give them just a little bit of that ration in the morning, go to work, and then whenever you come back in the evening time, train with the food that you have left in the container. Whatever's left in that Tupperware container, you can put in their bowl and let them finish it off at night. So they're still getting the same amount of calories, but the majority of that food is coming from your hand and is coming through training. That can also be equally as effective if executed properly. The main idea is that the dog learns to access food through you. They have to go through you to get the food that they need to survive. And if you can tap into their mind that way, their motivation level is going to skyrocket. And once that motivation is super high, they're basically putty in your hands at that point.